Blood and betrayal are just the cost of doing business in the syndicate. But what happens when the ghost of the woman you mourned for 5 years walks into a bakery, holding a little girl with your exact eyes? Buckle up, because this isn't a fairy tale, it's a war. The rain in Boston's North End had a way of washing the blood off the streets, but it could never wash it from Dominic Castiglione's hands. At 32, Dominic was the undisputed head of the New England Syndicate. He was a man carved from marble and grief, a boss who ruled with absolute, terrifying precision. But today, he wasn't ordering a hit or shaking down a union boss. He was standing inside Pasticceria Vittoria on Hanover Street, surrounded by the suffocating scent of spun sugar, vanilla bean, and freshly baked ricotta. He was here to approve a wedding cake. In exactly 6 days, Dominic was scheduled to marry Isabella Moretti, the daughter of the powerful New York boss, Don Carmine Moretti. It was not a marriage of love. It was a merger. A blood pact designed to unify the East Coast territories and end a simmering Cold War. Isabella was beautiful, ruthless, and understood the life. She was everything a mafia boss needed in a wife. But she wasn't Clara. Clara Hayes had been the only light in Dominic's dark world. A civilian. A kindergarten teacher with a laugh that could disarm a room full of made men. 5 years ago, on a freezing November night, Clara's Honda Civic had skidded off the Longfellow Bridge and plunged into the icy depths of the Charles River. The police recovered the vehicle 3 days later. The driver's side window was smashed. The current had been violent that week. They never found her body. Dominic had buried an empty casket. Along with it, he buried his heart, his mercy, and his humanity. "Boss?" Matteo, his most trusted capo, murmured, shifting his weight near the glass display case. Matteo's hand naturally rested over the bulge of the Glock 19 hidden beneath his tailored Brioni suit. "The baker says the Amalfi lemon tier is ready for tasting." Dominic stared blankly at the 3-tiered monstrosity of white fondant and spun sugar roses sitting on the counter. "Just box it up," Dominic rasped, his voice rough like crushed gravel. "Isabella can taste it. I don't care." He turned toward the heavy glass door to leave, the claustrophobia of the bakery closing in on him. He reached for the brass handle, just as the little bell above the door chimed. The door swung inward. A gust of cold, rain-swept air blew into the warm bakery. Dominic stepped back to let the customer pass. It was a woman, her head down, shaking a wet umbrella. She wore a simple tan trench coat, her damp, dark auburn hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. In her left hand, she was gripping the tiny hand of a little girl in a bright yellow raincoat. "I know, sweetie. I promised you a black and white cookie, but we have to be quick," the woman said softly. The voice. It was a sound Dominic hadn't heard in 5 years outside of his own nightmares. It was the soft, melodic cadence that used to whisper his name in the dark. Dominic's heart seized in his chest. The breath was violently knocked from his lungs. The world around him, the bustling bakery, Matteo's heavy footsteps, the hum of the espresso machine ground to a sudden, agonizing halt. The woman looked up. Her emerald green eyes met his. The umbrella slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the tiled floor. All the color drained from her face, leaving her as pale as porcelain. She staggered back a step, a silent gasp parting her lips. It was Clara. She looked older, the soft innocence of her 20s replaced by the sharp, guarded edges of a woman who had seen too much. But it was her. The tiny freckle above her left eyebrow, the slight, crooked curve of her collarbone visible beneath her scarf. She was alive. Dominic stood paralyzed, his mind fracturing. It's a hallucination, he thought. The stress of the wedding, the lack of sleep. But then, the little girl in the yellow raincoat tugged impatiently on the woman's coat. "Mommy? Cookie now?" Dominic's gaze slowly dropped. The little girl was about 4 years old. She looked up at Dominic, entirely unafraid of the towering, terrifying man in the bespoke black suit. Beneath a mess of dark curls, she possessed a pair of piercing, icy blue eyes. Dominic's eyes, the shape of her jaw, the stubborn tilt of her chin, it was like looking into a mirror reflecting a ghost. "Clara," Dominic breathed, the name tearing from his throat like barbed wire. Panic, raw and absolute, exploded in Clara's eyes. She didn't say a word. She scooped the little girl into her arms with terrifying speed, abandoning her umbrella, and bolted back out into the pouring rain. Clara, Dominic roared. Boss, wait! Matteo yelled, confused, reaching out, but Dominic was already moving. He shoved past his capo, practically tearing the bakery door off its hinges as he burst onto Hanover Street. The rain was coming down in sheets now. Tourists and locals were hunched under umbrellas, dodging puddles. Dominic's frantic eyes scanned the crowd. He saw a flash of yellow ducking into a narrow, brick-paved alleyway near the Paul Revere Mall. He broke into a dead sprint. He didn't care about the puddles ruining his leather Oxfords or the rain soaking through his suit. He didn't care that leaving his security detail violated every protocol of the syndicate. He was a predator, chasing down an impossibility. He turned the corner into the alleyway, slipping slightly on the wet cobblestones. It was a dead end, blocked by an 8-foot wrought iron gate belonging to a private courtyard. Clara was trapped. She had her back pressed against the iron bars, shielding the little girl behind her legs. She was trembling violently, her chest heaving as Dominic approached. "Stay back," she choked out, her voice cracking. "Dominic, please, please, don't come any closer." He stopped 5 feet away. The rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead. He stared at her, drinking in the sight of her chest rising and falling, the rain dripping from her chin. She was breathing. She was real. 5 years, he whispered, his voice vibrating with a terrifying mix of profound grief and volcanic rage. "I buried an empty box, Clara. I stood in the snow and watched them lower a casket with nothing but a photograph in it. And you're here. You're alive." "I can't do this," Clara wept, shaking her head. "You weren't supposed to see me. We were leaving Boston tonight. She just wanted a cookie." Dominic took a slow, deliberate step forward. His eyes shifted from Clara to the little girl peeking out from behind her mother's trench coat. The girl stared at him with those unmistakable blue eyes. "Who is she, Clara?" Dominic demanded, his voice dropping to a deadly, quiet register. Clara swallowed hard, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "Her name is Lily." "And how old is she?" Clara squeezed her eyes shut. 4.5. The math struck Dominic like a physical blow to the stomach. 5 years ago, November, Clara's death. 4.5 years ago, this child was born. "She's mine," Dominic stated. It wasn't a question. "She's mine," Clara fired back fiercely, a sudden maternal aggression cutting through her fear. "I raised her. I protected her. You have no right to her." "I have no right." Dominic exploded, closing the distance between them in a split second. He slammed his hand against the brick wall right next to Clara's head, boxing her in. Lily whimpered and buried her face in Clara's coat. Dominic instantly softened his posture, taking a half step back, but his eyes remained locked on Clara's. "You faked your death," he snarled softly. "You let me believe you drowned in that river. You stole my child from me. Why? Was I that much of a monster to you?" Clara looked up at him, her green eyes blazing with a grief that matched his own. "You weren't the monster, Dominic," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But the people around you were. And if I hadn't died that night, they would have made sure Lily and I both did." The alleyway was dead silent except for the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the cobblestones. Dominic stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the gravity of Clara's words. "If I hadn't died that night, they would have made sure Lily and I both did." "Explain," Dominic commanded. The mob boss had fully returned. The vulnerability in his eyes hardened into cold, calculating steel. If someone in his city had threatened what belonged to him, they were already dead, they just didn't know it yet. Clara pulled Lily tighter against her legs, instinctively shielding the child from the sudden dark shift in Dominic's aura. "Let's get out of the rain," Dominic said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He shrugged off his heavy, expensive suit jacket and draped it over Clara's shoulders, making sure the fabric covered Lily as well. He led them out of the alley and down a narrow side street, bypassing the main thoroughfare where Matteo and his men were likely tearing the neighborhood apart looking for him. He keyed a security code into the back door of a high-end private cigar lounge owned by one of his silent partners. The club wouldn't open for another 3 hours. Inside, it was dark, warm, and smelled of polished mahogany and stale tobacco. Dominic locked the reinforced steel door behind them, flipping on a solitary dim lamp above a leather booth. "Sit," he said softly, pointing to the booth. Clara sat, pulling Lily onto her lap. The little girl looked around with wide, curious eyes, clutching the lapels of Dominic's oversized jacket. Dominic walked over to the bar, poured a glass of neat whiskey with shaking hands, and drank it in one burning swallow. He poured a glass of water and set it gently in front of Clara. He pulled up a heavy wooden chair and sat directly across from them. He didn't touch her, though every nerve in his body screamed at him to pull her into his arms to verify she wasn't a ghost. "Start from the beginning," Dominic said. "November 12th. The night you went into the river." Clara took a shaky breath, wrapping her hands around the glass of water. "I found out I was pregnant that morning. I was going to tell you at dinner. I even bought a tiny pair of baby shoes." A sad, bitter smile touched her lips. "But you called. You said there was an emergency at the docks, a dispute with the Moretti family over a hijacked shipment." Dominic nodded slowly. He remembered. It had been the catalyst for the bloody turf war that had only recently been resolved by his upcoming marriage to Isabella. "I decided to drive to my sister's house in Cambridge instead," Clara continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I got in the car. I was halfway across the Longfellow Bridge when a black SUV clipped my rear bumper. I tried to hit the brakes. Dominic. I slammed my foot on the pedal with everything I had. They were completely dead. They had been cut." Dominic's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ground together. The police report said the brake lines ruptured due to the impact of the crash. "The police report was bought," Clara said flatly, "just like the medical examiner would have been bought if they found my body. The SUV rammed me again, harder. They pushed me over the guardrail." She closed her eyes, a tear escaping down her cheek. "I remember the freezing water. I remember the panic. The pressure. I managed to kick the driver's side window out as the car sank. I swam to the surface, but the current pulled me away from the bridge, down toward the esplanade. I dragged myself onto the muddy bank, half dead, freezing." "Why didn't you call me?" Dominic asked, his voice cracking with agony. "I would have burned the city to the ground to find whoever did it." "Because of who was waiting on the riverbank," Clara said, her eyes locking onto his. Dominic went completely still. "Someone was waiting?" "A man," Clara whispered. I didn't recognize his face, but he was wearing a heavy wool coat. He walked right up to where I was lying in the mud. He looked down at me, and he pulled out a gun. He pointed it right at my head. Dominic's hands gripped the edge of the wooden table so hard the wood began to splinter under his immense strength. "Who was it?" "I don't know his name, but he didn't shoot me," Clara said, her voice shaking at the memory. "He squatted down, grabbed me by the hair, and whispered a message. He said, 'Dominic Castiglione cannot have a weakness if he is going to rule. You are his weakness. And the child in your belly is a liability. You disappear tonight. Forever. Or, tomorrow, I'll send him your head in a box. And then we'll wipe out your sister, your parents, and anyone else you've ever spoken to.'" Clara looked at the sleeping face of her daughter, who had finally drifted off against her chest. "He told me to run. He said if I ever contacted you, if I ever showed my face in Boston again, he would know. So, I ran. I dragged myself to a payphone, called an old college friend who lived off the grid in Maine, and vanished. I changed my name. I lived in cash. I did it to save our daughter, Dom. I did it to save you." Dominic felt a cold, paralyzing dread wash over his fury. This wasn't a random hit by a rival gang. This was a surgical strike, an inside job. Someone knew she was pregnant before he did. Someone had the power to buy the Boston police, manipulate an assassination, and orchestrate a cover-up. "Clara," Dominic said, leaning forward, his voice lethal. "Did this man have any distinguishing features? A tattoo? A scar? Anything?" Clara frowned, thinking back to the darkest night of her life. It was dark, but when he grabbed my hair, his sleeve rode up. He wore a heavy gold signet ring on his right index finger. I saw the crest under the streetlights. Dominic stopped breathing. "What was the crest?" "A falcon," Clara said softly. "A golden falcon clutching a bundle of arrows." The silence in the room became absolute. The air grew heavy, thick with the weight of a horrific revelation. The falcon clutching arrows. It was the centuries-old crest of the Moretti crime family. Dominic's mind raced at blinding speed, snapping the puzzle pieces together with sickening clarity. 5 years ago, the Moretti family was losing ground. Don Carmine Moretti needed an alliance with the rising star of the Castiglione syndicate. But Dominic had no interest in an alliance, and he certainly had no interest in an arranged marriage to Isabella Moretti, because he was hopelessly in love with Clara. To secure the alliance, to secure his empire, Don Carmine needed Clara removed, and he needed Dominic, isolated, grieving, and ruthless. And now, in 6 days, Dominic was scheduled to stand at an altar in Street Patrick's Cathedral and swear his life, his loyalty, and his empire to the very family that had attempted to murder his wife and his unborn child. They played me, Dominic whispered to himself, staring blankly at the wall. For 5 years, they played me like a pawn. Dominic? Clara asked, terrified by the vacant, murderous look that had suddenly possessed him. Dominic blinked, snapping his focus back to Clara and Lily. The grief that had weighed him down for half a decade evaporated, replaced by a cold, thermonuclear fury. He stood up slowly. I need you to listen to me very carefully, Dominic said, pulling a secure burner phone from his pocket. You are not going back to whatever life you built. You are going to a secure safe house that only I know about. A fortress. You and Lily will be guarded by men who answer only to me. Dom, no, Clara panicked, starting to stand up. If they find out I'm alive, they won't, Dominic interrupted, his voice echoing with terrifying authority. He reached out, gently cupping Clara's cheek. It was the first time he had touched her in 5 years. His thumb brushed away a lingering tear. Because by the time the sun sets tomorrow, there isn't going to be a Moretti family left. Within an hour, Clara and Lily were miles away from Boston, speeding toward a heavily fortified compound in the Berkshire Mountains. The armored SUV was driven by Silvio, a ghost of a man who existed entirely off the syndicate's official ledgers. He answered to no one but Dominic. Dominic, however, had to walk back into the lion's den. He returned to Hanover Street, his suit soaked, his expression carved from granite. Matteo and his men were frantic, pacing the rain-slicked pavement. Boss, Matteo exhaled, visibly relieved. What happened? You vanished. A ghost, Dominic lied smoothly, brushing the rain from his shoulders. I thought I saw the man who put my brother in the hospital 10 years ago. It wasn't him. Let's go to New York. I have a wedding to prepare for. For the next 3 days, Dominic played the role of the dutiful, stoic groom. He attended the final fittings, he sat through tedious meetings regarding seating charts, and he smiled coldly for the cameras when the paparazzi caught him leaving high-end restaurants with Isabella. Isabella Moretti was a striking woman, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of dark obsidian. But beneath her polished, designer veneer, she was a viper. On the 4th night, during a private dinner at the Moretti penthouse overlooking Central Park, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Isabella stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, swirling a glass of Barolo, wearing a heavy silk robe. You've been distant this week, Dominic, she noted, her voice carrying a chilling edge of authority, more so than usual. Merging 2 empires is complicated work, Dominic replied, sitting on the edge of a leather sofa. His posture relaxed, but his muscles coiled like a spring. Isabella walked over and trailed a perfectly manicured fingernail along his jawline. It doesn't have to be. We are going to rule the Eastern Seaboard. You have the muscle, and my father has the political connections. It's a perfect design. She paused, her eyes gleaming with dark amusement. Much better than a schoolteacher. Wouldn't you agree? Dominic didn't flinch. His heart stopped, but his face remained a masterclass in deception. Clara is in the past. Exactly where she belongs, Isabella murmured, pressing her lips to his cheek. She was weak, Dominic. She would have made you weak. My father understood that. And honestly, so did I. A king needs a queen who isn't afraid of the sight of blood. The admission hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Isabella hadn't just known about the hit. She had likely endorsed it. The Morettas had orchestrated the murder of his wife and child, and now they expected him to thank them for it. Dominic smiled a terrifying, hollow expression. You're right, Isabella. A king needs a queen who understands blood. He left the penthouse at midnight. By 2 a.m., Silvio had tracked down the man with the gold falcon ring. His name was Lorenzo, Don Carmine's top enforcer. They found him at a private gambling den in Queens. Dominic didn't send men to handle it. He went himself. When Dominic emerged from the soundproof back room of the gambling den an hour later, his knuckles were bruised, and his white dress shirt was stained crimson. But in his pocket, heavy and cold, sat the gold signet ring. Lorenzo had sung like a bird, confirming everything Clara had said, and handing over the final, damning evidence of Don Carmine's direct orders. The rehearsal dinner took place 2 nights before the scheduled ceremony, held in a highly exclusive, subterranean dining room beneath a luxury Manhattan hotel. The guest list was strictly family, the inner circle of the Moretti syndicate. Don Carmine sat at the head of the long mahogany table, flanked by Isabella and his top capos. Dominic sat at the opposite end, Matteo, standing silently behind his right shoulder. The room was loud, filled with the clinking of crystal glasses and the arrogant laughter of men who believed they were untouchable. "To Dominic!" Don Carmine boomed, standing up and raising a glass of champagne. He was a barrel-chested man, with silver hair and a ruthless smile. "The son I never had. Tomorrow, we bind our blood. Tomorrow, we become gods among men." The table erupted in cheers. Dominic stood slowly, picking up his own glass. The room gradually quieted, waiting for the groom's response. "Loyalty," Dominic began, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "It is the foundation of our world. Without it, we are nothing but animals. For 5 years, I have honored the truce between our families. I have bled for our shared interests." He reached into his tailored jacket and pulled out a small velvet jewelry box. He set it on the table. "I brought a gift for the Don," Dominic said softly, "to commemorate this historic alliance." Isabella smiled, clearly expecting a rare diamond or a watch. She gestured to one of the waiters to bring the box to her father. Don Carmine opened it, his smile faltering as he looked inside. There was no diamond, just a heavy gold signet ring featuring a falcon clutching arrows. The gold was smeared with dried blood. Don Carmine's face drained of color. He looked up, his eyes meeting Dominic's across the length of the table. In that split second, the old mob boss knew exactly what had happened. He knew Lorenzo was dead. He knew the ghost of Clara Hayes had returned to haunt him. Dominic Carmine started, his hand reaching instinctively toward the inside of his jacket. "You missed, Carmine," Dominic interrupted, his voice dropping to a terrifying guttural growl. "5 years ago, you missed." Isabella gasped, her chair scraping violently against the floor as she realized the trap they were in. But before a single Moretti could draw a weapon, the heavy oak doors of the dining room locked from the outside. Matteo and 6 of Dominic's most lethal men stepped out from the shadows of the serving alcoves, silenced submachine guns raised and steady. "You think you can wipe us out in our own city?" Don Carmine spat, panic rising in his throat. "You'll ignite a war that will burn New England to the ground." "There won't be a war," Dominic said coldly, adjusting his cuffs, "because by midnight, there won't be a Moretti left to fight it. You took 5 years of my life. You tried to drown my wife. You tried to murder my daughter." Isabella screamed as Dominic gave a single, imperceptible nod to Matteo. The sound of suppressed gunfire was a rapid, rhythmic series of sharp hisses. It was surgical, precise, and absolute. In less than 10 seconds, the reign of the Moretti family was completely, permanently extinguished. Dominic didn't look back as he walked out of the dining room. The air felt lighter. The suffocating weight he had carried in his chest for half a decade was gone. 2 days later, the sun was breaking over the lush, green canopy of the Berkshire Mountains. Dominic stood on the back porch of the safe house, a mug of black coffee in his hand. The violent storm in Boston felt like a lifetime ago. The syndicate was scrambling, but with the Morettis gone, Dominic's grip on the East Coast was absolute. However, for the first time in his life, the empire didn't matter. The sliding glass door opened. Clara stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in one of his oversized sweaters. The tension was gone from her shoulders, replaced by a tentative, beautiful peace. "She's asking for you," Clara said softly, stepping up beside him. Dominic looked down at her. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, as he tangled his fingers in her auburn hair, pulling her close. He kissed her a deep, desperate collision of grief, relief, and undeniable love. "I'm never letting you go again," he whispered against her lips. From inside the house, the sound of tiny footsteps padded across the hardwood floor. Lily appeared in the doorway, clutching a stuffed bear, rubbing her icy blue eyes. "Daddy?" she mumbled sleepily. Dominic's heart, frozen for 5 years, finally began to beat again. He smiled, setting down his coffee, and walked inside to pick up his daughter. The ghost was gone. His family was home. If you loved this story of betrayal, revenge, and a love that refuses to die, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow drama lovers, and subscribe to the channel for more intense, gripping, real-life inspired stories. Drop a comment below, what would you have done if you were Dominic? See you in the next one.